in Accra. It's 14th February 2025. My name is Omaru Sandamado, and this is the time we're going to bring you a broadcast that we had advertised to be bringing to you. It's a broadcast of a press conference to be addressed by former Attorney General Godfred. He served as Deputy AG in the first term of the Akufo-Addo administration under Gloria Akufo, and subsequently in the second administration of Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, he was elevated to be the Attorney General, leading the charge in prosecution and, of course, defense for the state over the past 4 years. Now he's a former Attorney General. A lot of the prosecutions that his office started were withdrawn or torpedoed, or rather dropped by this current Attorney General, Dr. Dominic Ayine, who once served as Deputy AG under Marita Birapiaupon in the first term of the John Mahama government, now elevated to be the substantive Attorney General. He has withdrawn charges against a number of persons who are what you can call persons with political interests or high-profile cases. That has got lots of people talking. There have been accusations that the government is doing the same thing it accused the former government of doing. And so 2 days ago, the Honorable Dr. Dominic Ayine, Attorney General, called the press to explain why he withdrew some of the charges. Now, the former AG, Godfred Dami's press conference, we believe ostensibly is intended to respond to some of the statements that were made by the Honorable Dominic Ayine, because, believe it or not, Dominic Ayine's withdrawal of these charges is almost like a professional attack on on the Honorable Godfred Dami. That press conference is about to start. Hansen Ajiman, who is a court correspondent, has covered extensively a number of these cases, is at the press conference which is happening at the Accra City Hotel. And he's joining me now. Hansen, you're welcome. If you can hear me, that press conference, has it started yet? Have you seen some of the personalities supporting the former AG in the room yet?
Well, the press itself has not started, but we've seen the second Deputy Attorney General, former second Deputy Attorney General, Diana Asunabadapa. We've not cited the Attorney General himself, Godfred Dami. Neither have we cited his first Deputy Attorney General at the time, Alfred Tuan. But we've seen some persons affiliated to the New Patriotic Party who are here to show support to the former Attorney General and Minister for Justice. We've seen Palgrave Boache Dankwa, who used to be at the presidency in charge of governance. Also, we've seen NPP parliamentary candidate for Wenchi in the 2024 general election, Kojo Frimpong. Preparations really are underway, and as we've seen, there's a projector here that projects that the former Attorney General and Minister for Justice will be addressing the press shortly. We have indications that obviously this address will be in response to the address by the new Attorney General, Dr. Dominic Ayine, because on Wednesday, when that address was done, we tried reaching the former Attorney Generals, and they indicated to us that they would rather want to respond through a statement, but we didn't know that it was going to be through a press conference. So obviously, the former Attorney General and his deputies ostensibly will be responding to some of the issues that they raised during the press conference by Dr. Dominic Ayine, and also essentially to perhaps justify the continuous prosecution or the prosecution of some of the cases during their tenure as Attorney Generals and Ministers for Justice. If you would recall, the Attorney General, Dr. Dominic Ayine, during his press statement indicated that some of the cases ought not to have started in the first place, because he thought that, one, the kind of people who were paraded to be prosecuted were targeted politically. And he makes mention of Dr. Keselato Forsen, who was Deputy Finance Minister at the time of the ambulance deal, and currently is the Finance Minister for Ghana. he also mentions of some prosecutions that did not meet the facts. He talks about the Collins Dowder case, where
so Hansen,
describes
you are listing for us the number of issues. So let's quickly summarize. The current Attorney General has raised a number of issues at the press conference 2 days ago. So he raised issues and explained why he has had to withdraw a number of these charges. Many people are saying that it's a novelty, it's a precedence in our legal space. It is very helpful, it's very good that for the first time we are hearing an Attorney General explain why. But Hansen, the effect of this withdrawal is acquittal, isn't it? And this explanation, it is the first time we are seeing that, even though in the past we've seen nollie prosequa filed by Godfred and his predecessor, didn't we?
Yes, so if you look at the laws, there are several modes for which a case against an accused person, before judgment is delivered, the case may be dropped. And the Attorney General may like to exercise his powers under Article 88 of the 1992 Constitution, which is a nollie prosequa, which is essentially to say that he's terminating the prosecution. However, when you exercise a nollie prosequa, it does not acquit the person who has been discharged. Essentially what it does is that it discharges the person, but in the near future, if the Attorney General is so minded to bring the case against the said accused person, he will be allowed to bring the case against the accused person. Now, if you look at the Criminal Offences and Procedure Act 30, it also details processes for withdrawing cases. And so the Attorney General may withdraw a case before closing his own case. That is, before the accused person is asked to raise a defense. When the Attorney General drops a case at that time, according to Act 30, it only amounts to a discharge. However, when the Attorney General withdraws a case after he had closed his case, per the wording of Act 30, it amounts to an acquittal and a discharge. And so that is what the Attorney General, Dr. Dominic Ayine, on Wednesday alluded to. But the contention by some persons has been that acquittal is an acquittal simpliciter, and therefore withdrawal in its sense, no matter what time the case is withdrawn, whether the state had closed its case or is yet to close its case, cannot be deemed to be an acquittal. But of course, that is an argument for lawyers and the judiciary. Perhaps if the judiciary is faced with a case on looking at the constitutionality of the said provision to determine if indeed a withdrawal after the prosecution has closed its case could amount to an acquittal, strictly speaking. But as the wording of Act 30 puts it, a withdrawal after the prosecution has closed its case amounts to an acquittal. Now, the other thing has been that when the state withdraws cases, whether through a withdrawal or through a nollie prosequa, the convention had been that the state do not owe the public or the person being accused an explanation. And if you would recall, in the Gregory Afoko case, the case had traveled for to a certain extent, and the state arrested the second accused person, which accused person currently has been convicted in that particular matter. The Attorney General then entered a nollie prosequa into the case, and this was about 4 years into the arrest of Gregory Afoko. It led to the case starting again. And then the case went all to the end, and a hung jury was held for Gregory Afoko, and he's still in custody. So within the chain of events, his lawyers thought that it was wrong for the Attorney General to enter nolle prosequi as and when he wishes, particularly without explaining to the Ghanaian populace and also explaining to the accused person. And so the lawyers argued at the Supreme Court that if you look at the powers of nolle prosequi granted to the Attorney General, it is a discretionary power that the Attorney General is exercising, meaning that it ought to be regulated by Article 296 of the 1992 Constitution. Now, if you look at Article 296 of the 1992 Constitution, it provides guidelines for which discretionary powers ought to be exercised. One is that when you are exercising discretionary power, it need not be unreasonable, it need not be capricious. But 296 further goes ahead to say that where a body has been given the power to exercise a discretionary power, which is judicial in nature and quasi-judicial in nature, a constitutional instrument should be laid before Parliament in line with provisions in Article 11 of the 1992 Constitution, which provides guidelines for laying subsidiary legislations like a constitutional instrument, essentially to guide how that administrative body or that constitutional body is going to exercise those discretionary powers that are judicial in nature or quasi-judicial in nature. So, based on the strength of Article 296, the lawyers of Gregory Afoko went to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court argued and dismissed their case, saying that those powers granted the Attorney General in respect of nolle prosequi in Article 88 do not in any way amount to judicial discretionary powers, but are rather administrative discretionary powers. And hence, there was no need on the part of the Attorney General or the Office of the Attorney General to explain to the Ghanaian people why it entered the nolle prosequi. So this, we must say, is the leading legal opinion as far as granting an opinion on a nolle prosequi or a withdrawal of a case by the state. However, Dr. Dominic Ayine, during his press conference, expressed his opinion, which is contrary to some provisions in Act 30 that allows for the nolle prosequi, and also essentially the decision of the Supreme Court in the Gregory Afoko case. He indicated that, in his opinion, to foster transparency and to let people understand why the state will act in a certain way, he would give reasons for his decision to enter into a nolle prosequi. And that is why we got those decisions from Dr. Dominic Ayine, which obviously is at variant with the practice over the years and the position of the Supreme Court on the matter.
I see. Interesting, Hansen. So let's remind our viewers again of the key cases that have been dropped. Of course, the biggest would be the man who is now our finance minister preparing to deliver his budget statement to Ghanaians on behalf of the president. That was a big case. There were several other big cases that is almost like the first act of the new Attorney General, Dr. Dominic Ayine, was to withdraw charges. And for many, it looks like paving the way for their nomination or appointment by the president. So let's walk through some of the key or the major cases that has had charges withdrawn on before we look at what Godfred Dame may possibly say in defense and how Godfred Dame's tenure as AG was attacked by this very withdrawal by his successor.
So obviously the first case has to do with the Republic versus Arthur Forson and Richard Japa. Now, this is important because if you listen to the address by Dr. Dominic Ayine, he used the actions of Godfred Dame while prosecuting the Atuforsen case to essentially attack his personality and attack his professional ethics as a lawyer and also as a minister for justice. Now, the Atuforsen case had to do with the purchase of some ambulances. The government of Ghana entered into a contract to purchase some ambulances. The ambulances came in and were not fit for purpose. At least that was the argument advanced by the former Attorney General and the state at the time. And so, in the view of the former Attorney General, the state had incurred some loss. And so somebody ought to pay for that. Somebody was supposed to pay for the price for it. And so the state argued that Atuforsen, who was a deputy finance minister, signed the letters of credit which formed the basis for payment for the contract. And he signed those letters of credit without authorization, essentially arguing that Atuforsen acted recklessly as a deputy attorney general that resulted in challenges and problems for the country. The case went on. The state argued the case. The judge who sat on the case, Justice Xavier Sewa, a Court of Appeal judge now at the time when the case started was a High Court judge, ruled that the state has been able to prove a prima facie case against Atuforsen and Richard Jakpa, and that Atuforsen and Richard Jakpa ought to answer to the charges. Atuforsen opened his defense and closed his defense. Richard Jakpa also opened his defense. Richard Jakpa also opened his defense. He was at the verge of closing his defense when issues came up about Godfred Dame attempting to influence his testimony in the matter. These issues brought about some motions by the accused persons asking the High Court to cancel and strike out the charges because of what they believe was a professional misconduct on the part of Dr. Kesel Atuforsen. The judge looked at it, and we all remember that leaked audio where there was an interaction between Godfred Dame and Richard Jakpa. But the judge thought that the accusations against Godfred Dame were not indeed true, and that at no point in time in the audio could you hear Godfred Dame seeking to influence Richard Jakpa to testify in a certain way. So it allowed for the case to proceed. However, lawyers of Richard Jakpa and Dr. Atuforsen were challenging the ruling of Justice Xavier Sewa at the Court of Appeal. They thought that the state had not been able to prove its case against them. So at the Court of Appeal, by a 2-1 majority judgment, the Court of Appeal ruled that the state didn't prove a prima facie case against the accused persons, and essentially striking out the charges and acquitting and discharging the accused person. Godfred Dame, then Attorney General, made known his opposition to this matter and then served notice of appealing the Court of Appeal's judgment at the Supreme Court. Actually, we have been told that he filed the appeal at the Court of Appeal. And so the first thing that Dominic Ayine, PhD, did was to withdraw that appeal against the acquittal of Dr. Atuforsen and Richard Japa. Another case of interest has to do with the case involving former Works and Housing Minister Collins Dauda. The argument against Collins Dauda has been that certain monies were budgeted and allocated for the construction of the Sagleme housing project, and that he used that same money and even more of that to construct less of those housing projects, and to the state thought that it amounted to a financial loss to the state and that he ought to answer to those charges. But Dr. Dominic Ayine at his press conference noted that the charges didn't really agree with the facts and evidence available, even though he agreed that if you look at a case like the if you look at a case like the Sagleme housing project, there ought to be certain accountability exerted. Somebody ought to be made to answer for same. He thought that it needs to be looked at holistically, hinting that even former Works and Housing Minister Samuel Atachian also took certain decisions with respect to the housing project, and if Collins Dauda should be prosecuted, then it stands to reason that Samuel Atachian, who also acted in a similar manner like Collins Dauda, should have been added to the charges. He should have been added to the case and charge as well. He said that he may look at it in the nearby future and see how to go around it. The third political case has to do with the case involving Samuel Ofosu-Ampofo. Samuel Ofosu-Ampofo, then chairman of the National Democratic Congress, he was captured on a leaked audio where he was engaging party officers allegedly to destabilize the country. The state had presented its case. The judge presiding over the matter had ruled that Samuel Ofosu-Ampofo should open his defense in the matter, but ultimately that didn't happen because then Dr. Dominic Ayine took this decision. And of course, the Democracy Hub protesters, about 53 of them, were arraigned for various acts of violence, as the former Attorney General would like to describe it, during a protest against illegal mining, where they blocked major roads, destroyed what the former Attorney General described as public property. There were videos of the burning properties belonging to some political parties. They were arrested and denied bail for 2 weeks. Ultimately, the court granted them bail, and the conversation had been really that should persons who were advocating for the government to end a menace like illegal mining should be prosecuted. But the Attorney General's department at the time, led by Godfred and his two deputies, thought that the accused persons had other motives and their actions were criminal in nature and ought to be prosecuted. And led by Oliver Bakavoma, or he at a point in time was even charged with stealing for taking out a key from a van belonging to the Ghana Police Service and throwing it away. But that particular charge was dropped even before the withdrawal by the current Attorney General, Dr. Dominic Ayine. And then there's also the banking sector cases. There's one relating to the UT Bank and Unibank, where some persons or past officers who were found wanting in the collapse of these banks were hauled before the court to be prosecuted. Out of the numerous people who are part of the case, particularly Dr. Kwabena Dufour and his son, Dr. Kwabena Dufour II, and also Kofi Amoaben. All these persons, according to documentations we've seen from the Office of the Attorney General, are still facing charges against on these issues. And the Attorney General, Dr. Dominic Ayine, says he's still engaging their lawyers and other stakeholders to know the next line of action. But he withdrew the charges against the former Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Johnson Esiama, who has been appointed as the Governor of the Bank of Ghana. And this is one of the appointments that we've seen the NPP minority in Parliament raise issues. But the case against Dr. Johnson Esiama was that as Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana, he allocated certain monies to certain banks without going through due process. And so one of the charges against him was that he breached the Bank of Ghana regulations. He was also accused of causing financial loss to the state. But Dr. Dominic Ayine argued that if you look at the acts of Dr. Johnson Esiama, you cannot say that it actually amounted to financial loss to the state, because some of the monies that were allocated were recovered, and those in outstanding, the UMB is making those payments. And so if the monies can be recovered, then you cannot say that that amounts to financial loss to the state.
Interesting. So, Hansen, these cases are the ones that the Attorney General has dropped and he has defended them. In his defense, did he at any point say any of the prosecutions amounted to persecutions, where persecution here meant there was no evidence but the persons were charged anyway? What I'm trying to say is that did Godfred Dame's successor attack his professionalism directly in any way, for which reason we should expect this press conference where he may want to come and, cleanse his image?
So Dr. Dominic Ayine, at his press conference, argued that the withdrawal of the cases fell on three separate grounds. One, on ethical reasons, because his firm represented some of the accused persons, and on ethical reasons he couldn't have prosecuted those people, because as a managing partner of the firm, before admitting the cases, he agreed in the defense of the accused persons. And there were instances where he actually even contributed to the arguments to be advanced in court, and sometimes even made changes to arguments that were advanced by the lawyer on record, which was Godwin Eduje Tamaklo, who is currently heading the NPA. And he says, having had belief in the case of his clients, he couldn't in any way have continued with those prosecutions. He singled out the cases of Republic versus Atuforsen and Richard Jakpa, as well as Republic versus Samuel Ofosu Ampofo. And he was clear in his mind that the case against Atuforsen was nothing but one that was politically targeted at Dr. Kesel Atuforsen. He then went ahead to even outline some of the actions of Godfred Dame in that case, referring to that phone interview between Godfred Dame and Richard Jakpa, who was an accused person, where Godfred Dame was said to have engaged him without his lawyer, knowing very well that he had a lawyer representing him, where he was said to have recommended to the accused person to make presentations in court to the extent that he had a medical challenge and couldn't appear in court. And also accusations by Richard Jakpa that Godfred Dame sought to influence his testimony in the matter. So he called out Godfred Dame as far as these issues are concerned, and indicated that he acted in an unprofessional manner. In some cases, he felt that the state lacked enough evidence to prosecute those persons, and he thought that it was baffling that a lawyer, a prosecutor will go to court when knowing very well that he did not have enough evidence to prosecute the person. And then the third ground was that in some of the cases, reasonable doubt had been created about the guilt of the accused persons. And if you look at our criminal system, the burden of proof against an accused person is proof beyond reasonable doubt. And so if the defense attorneys are able to raise some reasonable doubt in the case of the prosecution, then it will mean that it may amount to, or it will amount to, an acquittal in favor of the accused person. So if you look at all these three grounds, not only has he questioned the professional integrity of Godfred Dame, he's also questioned his effectiveness as Attorney General who presided over these cases.
Very well. Thank you so much, Hansen Ajiman. This press conference by Godfred Dame was advertised for 10:30. It's an hour now since that advertised time. Is there any indication they're starting now? If not, we could just wrap it up here and hold on to the start. Aside his former deputy who is there, anybody else of interest joined him?
Pretty much still the same old person that we've had here.
Which means they are not likely.
Some 15 minutes ago we had it.
Which means they don't look ready. They don't look ready to start.
Well, we had an announcement some few minutes ago that they may start shortly, but obviously we cannot confirm or deny if he's here.
Okay, Hansen, so I will come back to you when that press conference starts. Hansen Ajiman is our court correspondent. He's at the Accra City Hotel where former Attorney General Godfred Dame advertised a press conference for 10:30 this morning, which press conference is yet to start, ostensibly to respond to a number of issues that his successor in office, the Honorable Dominic Ayine, has raised at a press conference where he also came to defend a decision to withdraw charges against a number of persons who have been high-profile personalities who have been standing trial. And that press conference is yet to come off. When it starts, we'll come back to bring you the live events from there. This is Channel One Television, broadcasting from number 5 Ola Hansen Lane at Tesano in Accra.
Step up with DSTV and we'll show up by giving you more incredible entertainment.